upon disembarking in Port Arthur, his old teacher, Chen Baochen, who was already over 80 years old, also arrived in Port Arthur, along with many other old officials, all coming to seek positions. Puyi, the sole person there, was now being approached by these people asking for official positions. In Port Arthur, just as discussions were underway about this so-called founding of a nation, Puyi received news that struck him like a thunderbolt. The Japanese planned to establish a Manchukuo republic and wanted him to serve as regent. Puyi was furious, stating that he had agreed to become emperor, not a regent. The Japanese replied that the decision had been finalized by the Kwantung army, and he had to accept it. If he didn't, he should be cautious. He was also fearful. Ultimately, after negotiations, the result was that he would first serve as regent for a year, and after that, the system would transition to a monarchy. This marked the beginning of his 14 years as a puppet ruler of Manchukuo, from Lushun to Changchun. Before assuming the regency, he had to first go through a series of pretended petition performances, where former officials and elders held banners and requested him to take up the position. He initially refused several times, but eventually agreed, following a process similar to ancient Chinese abdication ceremonies, where the drama had to be fully played out. On March 8, 1932, the flag of Manchukuo was raised in Changchun, with Puyi serving as regent and Zheng Xiaoshu as prime minister. What were his main tasks as regent? Mainly to review documents brought to him by the Japanese. He would glance at them and stamp approved, kaikei. Later, he discovered that he could only write approved. If he wrote anything else, it would not be accepted. He eventually didn't even bother to open the envelope containing the documents. He would simply write approved and have them taken away. Later on, he became even more indifferent, sometimes just writing K and letting them take it away because he actually had no real power. The high-ranking officials in this government were all Chinese, such as ministers and heads of departments, but none of them discussed national affairs with Puyi. Whenever someone came, they talked about global situations, culture, or personal matters. No one discussed governmental affairs. Why? Because for any government affairs, the response was always, "The vice minister handles that." And all the vice ministers were Japanese. The Chinese were appointed to the high positions, but had no decision-making power. It was the Japanese vice ministers who handled all affairs. Therefore, Manchukuo was entirely a puppet government. Sometimes when they argued a little with the Japanese only needed to say, "This was decided by the Kwantung army," and they didn't dare to say another word. Even Zheng Xiaoshu was no longer afraid of Puyi. Sometimes when Puyi got angry with Zheng Xiaoshu and slammed the table, saying, "If this were the Forbidden City, everyone would kneel down when I slammed the table." Because he was the emperor, others had to kneel when he slammed the table. Now when he slammed the table here, Zheng Xiaoshu had no reaction and said the words should be said to the Japanese. Thus, this was a very humiliating puppet government of a country in decline. On March 1st, 1934, Puyi fulfilled his long-held dream and officially ascended to the throne as Emperor of Manchukuo, known as Emperor Kangde. In 1935, Chen Baochen passed away. In April 1935, Puyi went to Japan, arranged by the Kwantung army, to meet with Emperor Hirohito. Emperor Hirohito even came to the station to welcome Puyi. Accompanying Puyi was a man named Yasunao Yoshioka. Despite many outsiders describing Yoshioka as Puyi's close friend, Puyi himself insisted that Yoshioka was not his friend at all. He was a spy arranged by the Kwantung army to closely monitor Puyi. It is certain that listening devices were also placed around Puyi, because every word he said and every action he took would be known by Yoshio Okawa immediately. Puyi was very fearful. He said, "From then on, I feared even more things. I feared the Japanese, feared my family, feared the ministers, because they could betray me. Later, I even feared sleeping. I dared not ask attendants to stay awake for me, nor did I dare ask servants to stand guard. I was not reassured even when guards were assigned to me. Finally, I thought of a method to rely on fake guards. I had people make several human-sized dummies out of grass and mud, dress them in military uniforms, and place them behind my room. Of course, I did not disclose their purpose to anyone. Before going to bed at night, I moved them into my bedroom and lined them up in front of my bed. I thought, if anyone wanted to harm me in the middle of the night, at least it might startle them. Can you imagine how pitiful this was? A person slept with a few fake mud figures in front of them because he could not trust any real person. His younger brother Puyi married a Japanese noblewoman, Hiro Saga, which happened in 1937. Why was this so important? Because Puyi had no children, according to the succession arrangements of Manchukuo. If the emperor had children, priority would be given to the emperor's children. If he had no children, priority would be given to his younger brother. If his younger brother was not suitable, priority would be given to his younger brother's children. This was the sequence of succession. So when Puyi married Hirosaga, Puyi was very afraid. He knew the Japanese were more likely to support a person of Japanese descent to be the emperor. Therefore, if Puyi had a child, his death was imminent, and he felt increasingly fearful and worried. During this process, the incident of Wanrong's drug addiction and adultery also occurred. Wanrong's drug addiction became increasingly severe, and it was said that she had an affair with someone and gave birth to a child. Wanrong always thought the child was taken away and raised by others, but in reality, the child was killed after being born. This was also a very painful matter. In 1937, because Wanrong's condition was very poor, he remarried to Tan Yuling, but Tan Yuling died suddenly in 1942. The Japanese gave her medical treatment, but during the treatment, Tan Yuling died. Why? Because Tan Yuling often talked about international situations and criticized the Japanese in front of Puyi. Tan Yuling was educated and came to this Manchukuo after being educated, so in 1942, Tan Yuling was killed. Next, he married concubine Fu, Li Yuqin, who was his fourth wife. This was Puyi's life during the decade or so in Manchukuo.